Good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock. My name is Jill Nogaris, and I am the English coordinator here at the Virginia Department of Education, and just want to welcome you to our next webinar in our series of comprehensive literacy webinars. We are fortunate enough to have and collaborate with the Office of PALS at UVA, and we have Lisa Tyree on with us this morning. She will be hosting this webinar and walking us through how we can use PALS reports to make instructional decisions in our classrooms. And I also have my colleagues Taylor Snow and Carmen Keurig with me today. We will be monitoring the chat in hopes of reporting some of your answers, but then also to questions so that we can get back to them at a later date, more personally. So if you do have questions as we're going along, please use the chat. Please use the chat.
Hi, everyone. It looks like Jill's having a few technical issues, so I will go ahead and make our formal introduction. So without further ado, Lisa, we'll hand it off to you, and we'll get started. Thank you all very much for being here.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much for having us at the PALS office, and I feel privileged to represent PALS here today. Hopefully the volume, everybody can hear me okay, and Taylor and Carmen, Jill, I'll just defer to you if you have any issues with my volume. I'll just keep my eyes open. So let's go ahead, and I just want to share, oops, let's see, that's not good.
She's still back.
Yeah, she has the screen. So.
Of course.
Oh, her PowerPoint shut down. So she just...
All right, well, slight technical difficulty here with PowerPoint, so bear with me for a minute. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen again. Okay, all good apparently. Okay, so I'm gonna just skip on ahead here. So thanks for your patience, those of you that are viewing today. So our agenda, from my perspective, you can see here, it's mid-year, obviously. A lot of you have probably just finished your mid-year data and collection, and you have that. And so I really wanna focus today on exploring some purposes of examining that mid-year data, and then get into some of the reports and learn about them, learn about some of the resources that you can use to inform and monitor your instruction. And then lastly, we're going to learn about some upcoming professional development tools that we've been working on here at PALS to support you in data analysis and knowledge building. So given again that it's mid-year, we're going to talk primarily from that perspective and that lens. So here you see some of the purposes for administering mid-year PALS. Starting there down on the bottom left, we see evaluate effectiveness of instruction. And if we think about comparing students' fall scores to mid-year scores, that can tell us a little bit about the effectiveness of instruction, but not everything about it. So in a general sense, you should consider sort of in a way what signal it gives you with regards to that global question of, are children responding to instruction? And the same goes for those next two purposes that are listed as we kind of go around the circle there. And monitoring student development relative to end of year expectations. We're going to talk about that when we discuss mid-year ranges. And assessing and evaluating student growth. So you want to always remember that a simple mid-year task score can't tell you everything about their development or growth, but it is an important piece. So that leads to that next one of informing instruction. And when we know where students are with different skills, we know where to instruct them. And so come mid-year, you may also find that you have gaps in that information, and the mid-year tasks can also help you fill those gaps. And lastly, there, as we come full circle, when you have information from mid-year, you can use some of our resources that we have at PALS to help maximize those resources. You can look at that data, and we'll discuss some of those today. All right, so I mentioned that we were going to talk about mid-year ranges, given that we're discussing mid-year data. So ranges are critical, right? So just want to make sure everybody has a good understanding of where the ranges came from. So here you can see how they were developed. So keep in mind, before we dive into them, when you see or I say the term quote unquote grade level, we know that the concept of grade level varies. And with PALS, grade level or reading levels is just one piece of information. It's not a guarantee that the student's performance in other aspects of learning or assessments is going to be that same way. So in kindergarten, let's start there. In kindergarten, the ranges were developed by looking at the majority. We took the majority of kindergarten students who were reading on or above back at where they were in mid-year in kindergarten. So those are how the ranges were developed. Similarly, in first and second grade, the same information was taken, except that it wasn't so far off. It was just the end of that particular grade level. So you know, the majority of students reading on or above grade level at the end of first grade were reading within those mid-year ranges in first grade. And same with second grade. So this doesn't mean, of course, that if children are within the mid-year range, that they're going to be guaranteed to be reading on or above grade level 6 months later. Obviously, we know instruction matters. I also want to make note that students identified by PALS in the fall of the year should continue to receive that additional instruction for the entire year, regardless of how they did on their mid-year PALS and if they fell within range. Conversely, a child who was not identified by PALS in the fall, but who does not score within those ranges at mid-year, they would benefit from additional instruction, even though it's not required by the Early Intervention Reading Initiative. Okay, so let's move on here. You can see in this slide, I just wanted to give you a look at the ranges. Hopefully you're familiar with them. If not, they can be found in the News You Can Use, which is on the login page in the helpful links section. They're also on your resources tab within your PALS account under administering PALS in both the 1 through 3 and the kindergarten sections. So you can find them there. All right, so when we come to mid-year and have this data available to us, we need to think about big picture about growth. And when we talk about growth, we want all students to make a year's worth of growth in a year's time, right? That's the goal for every student that walks in our door. Well, when we have students with significant risk as identified by PALS, then we have additional instruction put in place for them, right? That 2.5 hours. So they should then be making catch-up growth. Through the Early Intervention Reading Initiative, they're receiving this above and beyond additional instruction directly related to their literacy needs. So they should make above and beyond that growth. That's the idea. And if they don't, they're always going to be behind. So that's sort of our formula for how we think about progress and understanding it in relationship to significant risk and growth with PALS. All right, with that in mind, it's really obviously important to set goals, and using PALS mid-year data can help with that goal setting. So here you see, I just have listed out some guiding questions that you might want to consider as you look at data. And before I read them out to you, I can't say enough about the importance of looking at individual tasks, because that's where the specificity of tailoring instruction comes in. You have to look beyond just that ID'd status or that summed score, beyond that benchmark, to truly know where the students need support. So looking at questions like these, you can take these back to PLC if you want to, or if you're analyzing your own data, think about where the students started the year, where they are now. Do you consider that sufficient growth so far this year? And is there a particular area of literacy development on which you should focus more intensely in order to help them achieve their goals? So just again, some guiding questions that you can use as you look through your mid-year data. All right, let's look at some goals. Here we obviously see a general goal that all students at mid-year would fall within the developmental range. Again, keep in mind that when we say grade level, that concept varies, and with the PALS grade level, it's just one piece of information, and it's not a guarantee that the students are going to perform in that same way in other aspects of assessment or their development. And so again, just a general goal here. And getting more specific, if we're looking at reading level goals, remember, levels don't tell us everything, but they do tell us something. And when we look at instructional oral reading level with PALS, we look at accuracy, we look at rate, they both come into play. And so here you see that the rates and ranges we use on PALS are listed. This again is also a resource. There are many different elements included in fluency. You also have to consider prosody, which the most simple definition of that is expressive phrasal reading, but there are many more elements to it. Prosodic reading brings in intonation and stress, tone, rhythm, reading with expression. And we all know there's this reciprocal relationship between fluency and comprehension, and all of this matters. And so just wanted to give you the different accuracy ranges that we use, and then the rate goals, and again, sort of how we think of prosody, because all of that comes into play when we talk about spring goals and an instructional oral reading level, where we want students to be with acceptable fluency and comprehension. And so that's what you see in front of you now. When you put all those considerations together, you can look at these as a general goal for students by the spring. And again, these are for typically developing students. So you must also consider where the student comes into you, and then thinking back to that equation, expect a year's worth of growth from where they started. And again, always keep in mind where the student enters with their knowledge and go from there. So for example, if a child enters first grade already reading on a mid to late first grade level, you would expect them to move beyond this goal, that a year later, they would be reading past that. So also very, very important, can't stress enough that other sources of data are also important. So you need to step back and think about that. Think about obviously comprehension, accuracy, rate, and those other sources that you have, classroom observations, other assessments that you've given, running records, anecdotal notes. This is just, again, one piece to look at. Okay, so we're going to take a look now at some of the reports that we have available that can help you examine growth and set goals. I'll show you basically where to find them on the PALS website, what they tell you, or maybe what they don't tell you, and I'll also do some thinking aloud analysis at the same time. So that'll sort of be how we go through these reports here. All right, so the first is the student history report. And all of our reports are found on the reports tab. No surprise there. And so we have a student summary history of all school years. So this is really, really helpful, where it tracks all the students' data in PALS that has ever been put in our system. So you can look at that by student on the reports tab in that student history section called Student Summary All School Years. We also have a student concept of word history report and the student summed score history. Again, not as helpful because it just gives you the summed score. And again, we want to break down and really look at how students are doing on task. But if you need it, it is there in that student history section. All right, so thinking about, like I said, I would do a think aloud of how to analyze certain reports. Hopefully you can see this somewhat closely enough. But here are some guiding questions, again, that you can use to analyze a student's score history. You can take this back, and if you're a coach or an administrator, have teachers jot down thoughts to these questions. Again, I'll go ahead and do a think aloud. When we look at student history, you want to start at the bottom of this report because that's going to be the furthest back in time. So we're looking in this case, first term that we have PALS data on this particular child is fall of kindergarten. So question number 1, did the student meet the sum score benchmark in the fall of kindergarten? Very simple yes or no question. Again, we want to dig past that, but it's a good starting point. So answer there is yes, they did. And while that gives us information about that child in the fall of kindergarten, whether or not they were at significant risk, we still need to keep going and drill down to the task level. So look at question 2. We're looking at cow now in kindergarten. And did they leave kindergarten with a firm concept of word? And the reason that we're looking at that is this is, the reason for that is it's an integration. COW is the integration of skills and the application of them. And that's evident in that COW score. So for number 2, no, this child did not leave with a firm concept of word as he or she only had a 2 on the COW word list. So that leads us into number 3. Do you think the student has made adequate growth in first grade so far? So now we're in first grade. We have some information about their history, how they were in kindergarten. And so now in first grade, we need to drill down to those specific tasks. So I look at spelling and I'd say, no, I don't think they've made adequate growth in spelling. They just went from a 7 to an 11. But I would really want to look at their specific feature scores in spelling to truly determine, the progress that they've made or the lack thereof. So we have a different report and we're going to look at that in a few minutes. Okay, growth in word list, looking at that word list score, the student has made adequate gains, I would say, as well as in their instructional oral reading level in first grade. But you'll notice, obviously, this student is ID'd now in the spring of kindergarten, they were ID'd. So we need to look at that growth from the lens of the catch-up growth that I talked about earlier. And so that's number 4, right? So if necessary, which it is because the student is ID'd or at significant risk, did they make catch-up growth? And overall, I'd say not quite. This progress that you see here in front of you, I would think would be reading levels for a growth for a typical child, but not necessarily catch-up growth. So come the end of year, obviously it'll be more evident. And then number 5, is there anything else that you notice? And, I would just say I'm wondering about maybe the writing instruction that the students had, because encoding doesn't seem to be there as evident in those spelling results. So I'd want to look at some other data, pull some of their writing samples to really see how the student has grown there and maybe what I can do for their instruction in writing. Okay, so now back to another report. We have individual growth reports that are available as well. And again, they're on the reports tab. And there are 2 different ones that are more specific with that individual growth. And they are the oral reading growth and the spelling and phonics growth. So let's move to spelling and phonics. You see that here in front of you. So clearly this child, I'm sorry, not spelling and phonics. We're going to look at this one first, the oral reading. So we're gonna see here, this child clearly needs to work on fluency and comprehension. Seeing this result makes me curious about the way maybe the word list was administered and whether it was administered in a correct way. The word list scores have apparently made a difference in making the instructional oral reading call what it is. And I would certainly want to look into the details of how this call was made as I determine that best fit, instructional fit for the child. You see the asterisk there indicates a slower rate. And you can see this report gives you all the information on rate and fluency and comprehension. So it's really helpful for getting that overall picture of growth, but you again would want to dig a bit deeper and pull in other sources of information to really impact your instruction there. And now is the spelling and phonics report, which shows the individual growth in spelling and phonics features. So this is key information as we know that there's such a strong link between students' reading and spelling. Spelling is clearly important to encoding, but spelling also impacts reading. So when you're thinking about growing strong readers, you need to think about reading and spelling as two sides of the same coin. What I mean by that is when we see our students spelling and how they're spelling, it shows us how they can encode features or patterns. And then we can reasonably conclude that these are the same things they'd be able to decode. And so by the same logic, right, same coin, if they learn new spelling patterns, then they'll be able to decode those patterns in text when they're reading. So using a report like this, where it's very broken down, can give us an insight into where their instruction needs to occur in both reading and spelling. Okay, here's an example of a kindergarten growth report. So as you can see here, it simply just shows the bars of how the students did on the individual tasks that are on the kindergarten assessment for each term. So the one in front of you, because it's mid-year, just has the fall score and then the mid-year score in the yellow bars. And then if you would proceed on to spring, you would get some green bars there, hopefully showing even more growth. So as you see here, it's a really nice visual display, often a very popular report to use during parent-teacher conferences. All right, so now we've looked at some individual reports. Let's take a look at some class reports that are available for mid-year data. And one of our most popular reports in PALS is the class summary. And so we really want to enhance the idea again that using the class summary is important, but you really want to look at those task level scores. And look beyond who's ID'd and who's not, and beyond just simply like checking that box. So here's an example of a first grade class summary, and this one's sorted by instructional oral reading level. So this report's helpful because it will help you see who may still be struggling with certain areas of literacy development by looking from the standpoint of not falling within the mid-year range on specific tasks. Again, you want to look beyond that sum score benchmark even when you're using that class summary. So look at the students who are not ID'd, who have not fallen within mid-year range, and that's indicated by the red. So these students, you know, you want to think about them because they would benefit from additional instruction like Harper, Hunter, Aiden, Michelle, where I have those blue arrows. For those students, you would want to look back at their student history reports. Were they close to being identified in the fall? And if so, in many cases, this is indicative of very little growth, and strong consideration should be given to them receiving additional support now. It's not too late. You can also use this report to look for trends across your class. If you look for vertical columns of red, for instance, that shows there might be a weakness with many students in a particular area. And that can help you as the teacher think about instruction for your overall class. Perhaps you need to shift the focus or give more emphasis to a particular area of literacy instruction. So again, just a couple different ways to look at that mid-year class summary report. And then here you see a kindergarten class summary report. And in this case, it's sorted by CAL word list. And this report's helpful because it again will help you see who's still struggling potentially with certain areas of development because they're not falling within a specific task range. So first you would think about maybe making note of the students who are ID'd but seem to be making great progress, as indicated by the fact that they're now falling within that mid-year range on tasks. So Walter, for example, he's an ID'd student, but now he's falling within that mid-year range on everything except alphabet rec. So what you consider asking yourself is, well, what, you've done some instruction, obviously, that's very successful. So what else or who else could potentially benefit from what's worked with Walter? And then you also want to look at the students who are not ID'd, but have several red scores as indicating that they're not within that task range. So those students would benefit from additional instruction, even though they're not ID'd. Students like Emma and Josh, potentially Levi, they may all benefit from additional instruction. These are the students we want to keep on our radar for sure. And we want to look back at their history, dig into their task scores, see where they were in the fall on each of those tasks, because in many cases, though they were not ID'd in the fall, given that they're not within the mid-year range now, that's indicative of very little growth, and really strong consideration should be given to giving them additional support. All right, so now let's move on to what resources we have at PALS that can maybe help you make that link between data and our resources. So our resources are found on our resources tab. And from there, you would pull down to K3 plan instruction. And just to give you an example, I mean, I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of our heavily used resources here is our instructional oral reading rates document, and it can be found under general resources. And we have so many, but again, just wanted to kind of orient you as to where you could find them. Of course, we want to always look for differentiated resources, and our site has many of those, such as our electronic lesson plans, which we have for the 4 different levels: emergent, beginning, transitional, and intermediate and advanced. All of the ELPs are obviously found within each of those corresponding sections. And our emergent ELP in particular links that data really well, because even within the emergent ELP, it differentiates. So definitely something you might want to check out as one of our resources to help you make that link between data and instruction. All right, another resource we have that I want to direct your attention to, quick checks. And our quick checks are just short probes given between PALS screening windows to measure progress in essential literacy skills. They're criterion referenced, and they can provide you with frequent feedback. So, more than just that 3 times a year, you can give quick checks, every 2 weeks, and get that information about the cumulative effect of classroom instruction and then of supplemental instruction with your tiers 2 and 3 reading interventions. So where to go with quick checks? You would go to your assess tab, and instead of pulling down to pre-K 3, which you're probably used to doing, go to the second one, go to quick checks. And then from there, you simply select the student. In this example, Peggy PALS is going to be taking a quick check on kindergarten spelling. So then you just select the task you want to give and move forward with giving it. You'll need some materials. The quick check materials can all be found on the resources tab, and then just pull down to quick check materials. We have reports that then you have access to with quick checks found on the reports tab. there are charts and summaries for your quick checks. And so let me just zoom in a little bit more. So for the reports, you have the option of a student progress chart, which I'll show you in a minute, and also an administration summary report. So let's look at the student progress chart. All right, so that student progress chart shows you whatever task, whatever quick check task you gave, gives you the date you gave it, and then shows the bars of how the student did, and then even gives you item level information. You can see on the left there with lowercase alphabet rec. And then the second one is just an example of the concept of word quick check and the progress chart that would populate there should you decide to give that one. So those are the progress charts. And then here's an example of the administration summary report, which is just simply, here's your class list. Here are the students that took quick check number 1, for example, and here's how they scored on it, which can give you a great overall picture for your whole class should you need it. All right. So now for like this second half, we know obviously how critical it is to look at data and using it as one way to evaluate growth. But we have to make sure that data works in conjunction with a knowledge about development in literacy. So what I want to spend a little bit of time with today in this session is focusing on some of the work that we have in place that will hopefully help you in using data and bringing that together with knowledge of development. And I'll highlight what we at PALS are doing on our end to bring development and data together. And to do that, we have to make sure we're looking, again, beyond that benchmark score. And we'll start with what some of our PALS data is showing us. So you see here at the top, we really want to make sure we recognize the difference between screening and success. And so you need to know that the PALS benchmark is not proficiency, and you need to understand patterns of performance on sub-skills and subcomponents, and they offer a much more valuable lens. And so in looking at this graph that we have here, and hopefully that'll help you understand what I mean by that. So on the bottom of the graph, on that bottom axis, is the PALS sum score. And then up the side, you see the probability of passing the 3rd grade reading SOL. So this is 1st grade as an example. And so what our data shows us is you see that a child with a very low PALS score, pointing the yellow arrow right now, of a 10 or 15, let's say, 1st grade, you can see that student has a low probability of passing the reading SOL. But look at the top peak of the graph, that blue arrow, a child with a high PALS score, like a 50 or a 60, has a high probability. But look at where the benchmark is. That PALS benchmark is that vertical blue, skinny blue line there. And so you can see that benchmark, if a child's right there, they don't have a guarantee of success on passing that SOL. So again, that's because the benchmark is not proficiency. It's not a proficiency benchmark. It's a screener for significant risk. Risk so significant that state dollars are allocated. So what we know is that the best way to consider PALS is through sub-skills, not the benchmark. So we have a few tools that we want to share with you that would hopefully help you with going beyond that benchmark. So already in place are our certification tutorials, and you may or may not be aware of them. They were new this year. These tutorials are designed to allow for certification of PALS pre-K, K, and 1 through 3 assessments. So in the tutorials, you learn how to administer and score each PALS assessment. Obviously very important. And at the end of each tutorial, you'll have the opportunity to take a certification quiz. We even have the estimated time to complete each tutorial provided for you, and you can time or a different day, and it will resume where you left off. Professional development points are awarded for the completion of the tutorial and the quiz as well. So that's one tool. We also have worked on some professional development modules to help with enhancing knowledge of literacy development and the PALS assessment. So the first, what you see here in blue, is about putting PALS in a developmental context and building that foundational knowledge. And then we also are working on a series of modules that will help you look at how to use PALS data to its fullest across a school year. We've been working on both of these supports, and we plan to roll them out next year. And I'll share a little bit about each of them with you today. All right, so again, coming soon, you see, I'll give you a brief overview or a little drive-by commercial of each of these. One, to support building a better understanding of development. And that's so critical that we understand how reading development works. And so this consists of a series of webinars that focus on reading development, where PALS fits into it and where it doesn't. And then the second is moving on to how you can use data and development to help you with targeted instruction. And so this series of modules in green here is called Using PALS Data More Fully Across the Year. And it's actually designed for coaches to use with teachers or instructional leaders to use with teachers. And again, I'm going to give you a brief overview of each of these tools, beginning with this one, the developmental context module. So you see here in front of you this schematic. We've been working with a team of people at UVA to create this schematic, and the first set of modules focuses on how this works. Again, where PALS fits in, and in some cases doesn't fit into these different components. So you can see at the top, reading comprehension is obviously the ultimate goal. It's the goal we want all of our readers to achieve. It's about making meaning, and we can all agree on that. So how do you get them there? It's a complex process, as you know. In order to understand that process, you need to clearly understand what reading comprehension encompasses. So our hope in these modules, this particular module, is that we will unpack the components of reading that factor into this ultimate goal of reading comprehension. And furthermore, we look at where PALS fits and doesn't fit into these components. So the first module is grounded in this simple view of reading. And it's a formula here, right? So the simple view is well-researched reading framework. It's essentially this formula that works the same way as the yellow and blue make green scenario. So it provides an explanation of the relationship between the two major components necessary for readers to reach that ultimate goal of reading comprehension. And that is that reading comprehension is the product of decoding and linguistic comprehension. And you'll notice, again, it's a product. It's not just a simple addition of the two. The idea being that if either side fails, reading comprehension can be negatively impacted. So again, our modules are grounded in this simple view of reading. And that forms the basis of information for all these modules. They're short, they're concise, they're recorded webinars that cover the topics that you see here. All right, and moving on to a drive-by of the second tool we have in place. The other one we've worked on, again, is to help provide this system of support in using PALS data across a school year. Again, this is designed for coaches or instructional leaders to use with teachers. It's definitely a heavier lift and requires more time and commitment across a school year because it has teachers really dig into their data multiple times throughout the year. So let me tell you a little bit about what that entails. You can see here the components that are included in it. There are recorded webinars, about 15 to 30 minutes, that all have a consistent structure. We're working on revising the content and working with certain divisions to make it better this year. Embedded within those webinars, we have reflection time and time for data analysis, so that the whole module sort of would take about an hour if you have that for PLCs or grade level planning, staff meetings, professional development. And again, this is something that gets repeated across the year, which I'll show you in a minute. We also have what's called a Coach's Corner document, and this is a document that supports the coaches in guiding the teachers through each module, giving you background knowledge, the materials that you need, additional resources that might relate to it. In that bright Kelly green, we have the Educators Express document as well that comes with each module, giving the teachers a synopsis of it and then all the materials that they would need to participate within it. And then this year, only as we've been working with individual divisions, we've provided individualized PALS contact just so we can really get some good feedback in order to improve the tool before we roll it out statewide. All right, so using PALS data more fully across the year, here you can see, we'll talk about how we can look at this information and put it all together. So the first module is all about getting to know your class by looking at your spring data or giving quick checks perhaps. And I'll show you a sense, it'll give you a sense of how these things work. But then we move on to module 2, where we talk about forming instructional groups. Module 3 is about small group instruction. Module 4, monitoring growth and reflecting on your instructional practice. Module 5 is all about that spelling reading connection that I talked about earlier. And then module 6 brings you to thinking about the next school year and getting poised for that. So that's sort of the way that these modules line up in sequence. And then here you can see the organization of how to work with it across a school year, when you would do it. Obviously, it's different for kindergarten and first and second grade because they're different assessments, but they both follow the same developmental process. We did break them apart this year, but there is still consistency within the kindergarten string and the 1 and 2 string to help with make it easier to think about it, using it across the K3 or K2 system. So there's some similarity. Module 3, we break it down by emergent, beginning, and transitional. And in module 6, we right now have it together for K and 1 through 2, but that might change, not sure yet. As I said, we're still working on revising them and getting feedback and making it the best we can. All right, so for each of those 6 modules that we have, we follow the same basic structure. So we begin with setting the purpose for the content of the module, and then we move into a case study demonstration where we walk you through the process that you will eventually be doing. From there, you complete what we call an investigative activity where you pause the webinar and you give it a try with practice data. Sometimes it's easier to sort of dig into data that's not your own, and it's easier to see things and get your feet wet with it before you are married to your own data. And then finally, we end with doing some field work where you then do that same work with your own class data, supported by your coach, of course. So that's sort of the way that the roadmap works for each of those 6 modules. All right, and in each module, again, like I said, we follow the same basic structure, and so it's pretty consistent, and hopefully that makes it easy to use and a useful, friendly tool for coaches and teachers. Again, these are going to hopefully be rolled out next year. So that's what the coming soon is about. So as you think about next year and thinking about your professional development and digging into data a little bit more, know that that's coming. And if you have any questions about that, as you start thinking about next year, please let me know and reach out to me. Happy to share more information about it, let you get a sneak peek at it, and or just have some conversation about what approach might be best for you. And before I turn it back over to Jill and Carmen and Taylor, just know, make note of our contact information here. We are certainly here to support you in any way as you're doing anything and all things PALS. Reach out by phone or email us at the PALS office if we can support you in any way. All right. So back to you guys.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us today. And thanks obviously to our guests with PALS. As always, we are happy to answer any additional questions you may have, and either via email or by phone. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We hope you'll also join us for some of our remaining webinars. Have another today at 2 o'clock regarding content area integration and disciplinary literacy. So we'd love to have you for that. And hope everyone has a great rest of your day.